of your skill level. First, we'll discuss the details you need to consider when you're setting up your show. We'll also discuss the types of files you can import as layers, how to import them, and how to resize, edit, and position them. After we cover the basics, we'll explore a number of different techniques you can use to achieve that sophisticated, multi-layered look in your shows. Before we get started, though, I wanted to take a moment to point out a couple of things. On all of the videos on this DVD, I'll be working in the latest version of Proshow Gold, version 3, not Producer. If you are using Producer, however, you will have extra features and options available to you that don't show up in the Proshow Gold interface. Don't worry, for the most part the videos are going to focus on the fundamentals that apply to both versions of Proshow. There will be, however, some cases when I need to address the extra features in Producer that apply to the lesson. So in these cases, I will switch over to the Producer interface so that I can point out and discuss those options. I'll be sure to let you know when that happens. The last thing I want to point out has to do with the workshop videos on this DVD. You may have noticed from the chapter listings that there are several videos on this DVD labeled as workshops. This means that for those particular videos, we've provided files that you can install and use for practice. These practice files are the exact same ones that I'll be using in the workshop videos, so feel free to open up your Proshow program, drop in those practice files, and follow along step by step. Remember, you can always pause the video. The saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. While this might sound a little dramatic in the context of creating a presentation in Proshow, it is still important to take a moment to consider a few details before you begin. For instance, how do you ultimately plan to share your show? On DVD? On a CD-ROM? Or maybe on your website? You probably already know that the different output options have limits when it comes to file size, display resolution, and even playback quality. In case you're not familiar with the differences between each output option in Proshow, here's a quick overview. Depending on the format you choose, you may need to go back and double check to make sure the images you plan to use in your show are high enough resolution for your needs. Let's say that your photos are 800 by 600 pixels, and you want to use them to create a show on DVD. You'll probably be okay because both NTSC and PAL standard DVD video resolutions are lower than that. NTSC is the video resolution standard that is used in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. NTSC video resolution is 720 pixels by 480 pixels. PAL video resolution is used in just about every other country in the world, and the PAL standard resolution is 720 pixels by 576 pixels. To find out what each country's TV standard is, you can either search online or consult the Proshow user guide. So let's say that you take that same show with the photos at 800 by 600 resolution, but you want to create a CD-ROM for people to watch full screen on their computer monitors, which are usually set at 1024 by 768 pixels. In this case, the images wouldn't be a high enough resolution to look good. Essentially, you'd be stretching your photo canvas that's too big. So now, you probably want to know the quick answer to what all of this ultimately means. To sum it up, make sure the resolution of your images is high enough for the output format you want to use. A good rule of thumb is to always use the highest quality materials you have access to when you're creating a show. That goes for images, videos, and audio files. I do have one quick note regarding working with extra large files. This is particularly relevant to Proshow users working with video or photographers using higher megapixel cameras on the market. While it is very important to use high-resolution content in your shows, there is an advantage to minimizing the file sizes as much as possible. You can often automate this task by using a content manager or image editing program such as Photoshop. Just resize your images to a resolution that's closer to what your output choice requires and save the file as copy, preferably in JPEG format. When doing this, don't forget that if you plan to zoom into your photo, you're going to need them to be even larger, or you're going to get that pixelized look when you zoom in. Doing this will allow you to import your files into Producer more quickly. It will also reduce rendering times. The time you save adds up if you're importing several hundred images. If you can reduce file sizes without sacrificing the image resolution you need, your files will be perfectly optimized for Proshow. Things to consider before beginning your show, like what aspect ratio do you want your show to be in? In Proshow, go to your show options. You can set your aspect ratio any way you like. The aspect ratio controls how wide your show is in relation to its height. By default, Proshow has it set to 4:3, which is the standard ratio you see on a traditional TV. However, if you're going to be displaying your show on an HD TV, you might consider choosing the 16:9 or widescreen option instead. You also have the option of setting a custom aspect ratio. Let's say I want to create a show for a display on the web that's perfectly square. I can set my custom aspect ratio to 800 pixels wide and 800 pixels high, and you'll see that the visible area in my slides is now a square. In this same Show Options window, you can control another feature called Safe Zone. The safe zone is a term borrowed from television production that describes the area of your show that is likely to be visible when viewed on a television screen. All TVs clip off a small part of the edge of the picture so that the entire screen is filled. That's why it's important to keep vital portions of your show away from the edges of the screen. Otherwise, you can get some surprises during playback. This issue tends to be of greater concern when working with text in your show. Because all TVs are a little different, there's no way to predict exactly how much of the area is going to be cropped. That's why it's a good idea to use the safe zone as a guide for positioning elements in your show. The default percentages, which you can see here in the Show Options window, work well with your typical modern television set. In the Preview window, you can see where the suggested safe zone boundaries are. Notice these gray borders on the margin of the window? If you right-click in the Preview window, you can choose to hide the safe zone boundaries if you don't want to see them. Regardless of whether or not you choose to make your safe zone margins visible, the safe zone affects only the preview of your show. It won't appear on the TV screen during your final playback. If you want to adjust the area of coverage of the safe zone guides, you can change the percentages. For example, if I wanted to be really conservative, I might increase the safe zone percentages by 5% for the width and the height. Notice how the preview window is now updated to reflect these changes. Now let's talk about scaling options for your slide layers. The scaling options determine the way your images or videos will fit on a slide. Let's experiment with some of the scaling options to see how they affect my show. I'm going to right-click and select All. Then right-click again to select Scale Image. And you'll see that we have several options here. Let's choose Fill Frame. This option sizes the content so the image fills the entire slide, regardless of the dimensions of the file. You'll want to choose this option if you're trying to avoid having any areas of the background show through. Let's try another option. Select Fit to Frame. Now this option sizes the content so that the entire image fits within the boundaries of the slide. This sometimes means that the image will only fill part of the slide, like in the case of this vertical shot. The next option is Fill Safe Zone. Let's try that one. This option sizes your images to meet the minimum requirements in order to fill the safe zone, not the whole frame. If you choose Fit to Safe Zone instead, you'll notice that the images are now sized to fit inside the boundaries of the safe zone. If you want to ensure that not a single picture of your images is cropped when viewed on TV, use this option. The final option is Stretch to Frame, which, as you probably guessed, stretches the content as much as needed in order to fit the frame exactly. This is probably the least used option of the set because you can typically count on distorting your images if you use this option. And 9 times out of 10, you don't want that to happen. So this option is typically only used when you wish to make an abstract pattern or texture fit the frame without having to scale up the entire image. If you find that you constantly prefer one particular scaling option, you can always set this option to be your default in Proshow. That way you don't have to constantly change the scaling mode by hand each time you import a new image. This is great. To change your default settings, go to the Edit menu and select Preferences. If you click on the Show Defaults tab, you can set the scaling options to the one you prefer. The final topic I want to discuss is background images. If you access Show Options and select the tab called Background, you'll see that you can control your slide backgrounds here. All the settings you apply in Show Options will be reflected in every slide in your show. If you want to customize a specific slide's background separately from the rest of the show, you can always make your changes in the slide options. To change the background color, click on the button labeled Set Color and choose the color you want using the color picker. If you prefer to use a specific image for your background, choose the Image Background option and click on the Browse button. To use a file located on your computer's hard drive, choose Add Image. You'll notice that there's another option you can choose beneath the Add Image option called Add from Media Source. The latest versions of Proshow Gold and Proshow Producer come with free built-in content files called media sources. You can also buy additional themed media source files if you want to expand your options. Either way, these media source files are great for using as backgrounds, photo frame borders, and menus. To use a media source file as your background, just select the Add from Media Source option and choose the file you want from any of the collections available. If you decide to use an image as your background, you can always make adjustments to it in the Background Options window. You can use the color correction tools. You can also rotate or flip the image and even colorize it if you want a monochromatic look. If you have Proshow Producer, you'll notice that you also have the option of using a gradient as your background. Let me show you that. If you choose this option, you can customize the gradient by clicking the Edit Gradient button, and you have lots of options for controlling how the gradient looks. Things to consider before you begin working with layers in your show. Just like a painter won't apply a single drop of paint until he primes his canvas first, the same thing applies to your work in Proshow. It's helpful to do a little preliminary setup before adding content to your shows. Here's a quick recap of what we covered earlier. Decide how you want to share your show before you import a single image. The output format you choose will determine what the image resolution needs to be. Optimizing file sizes saves time. If you're working with files that are much larger than necessary, resize them to a resolution that's closer to what you actually need. It will reduce the time it takes to import the files and output the shows. Adjust your aspect ratio if you want your show to be displayed in widescreen or custom format. Watch out for the safe zone when creating shows for TV. Remember to keep vital parts of your show away from the edges where they might get clipped off during playback. Set your preferences for image scaling before importing files in your show to avoid adjusting the scaling manually. And finally, to add a slide background that applies to your entire show, whether it's a solid color, an image, or a gradient, apply your settings in the Background tab of the Show Options window. Now we're ready to move on to adding layers to your show.